Before we get into this episode of Relatively Prime, I want to take a few seconds to tell y'all about one of the coolest puzzles I have ever seen. Curvahedra. The brainchild of Edmund Harris, who you may know from multiple episodes of this show, and without whom, honestly, Relatively Prime couldn't exist. Curvahedra is a construction puzzle system, which can be used to create a bunch of different 3D structures from identical pieces, all of which link together without the aid of glue or tape. It's truly one of the best ways I have ever seen to communicate the awesomeness of three-dimensional geometry. Now, if you want to find out more about Curvahedra, or more reasonably, just want to give Edmund your money so that you can have one of your own, all you have to do is head over to curvahedra.com. That's curvahedra.com. I promise you won't regret it. Now, on to the show. This is Relatively Prime. Resources in the mathematical domain. I am Samuel Hansen. We spend a lot of time talking on this program about mathematicians and their research, but it's been a really long time since we've talked about an absolutely integral part of how people end up becoming mathematicians and doing that research, which is mathematics teachers. After all, if there were no math teachers, then who would first tempt us into the world of mathematics with wondrous things like factoring, which is really totally what got me hooked. Hey, don't look at me like that. I just love a good difference of two squares quadratic. This gap in coverage is why I called up...
You can call me Jo Morgan, maths teacher.
Jo wasn't always a math teacher. She started out working as an analyst at investment banks in England. Going from an analyst to a teacher is an interesting career trajectory. And the way it came about is interesting too. Jo had agreed to give a career talk at a local school in order to pad her CV. But at the end, something happened.
They all put up their hands and asked me questions that made me realise that teenagers ask really good questions, and teenagers are a nice group of people to spend time with, because they said things that surprised me and that excited me and that made me realise they were really smart and had all this potential. And I literally went back to work and sat down at my desk and thought, wow, that was a really interesting day. I feel different to how I usually feel. I had this little buzz, I felt this kind of job satisfaction I'd not felt before. And that was it. And then off I went and found out how to become a teacher.
So Jo left banking and studied to become a teacher. Her first placement was at a rather selective school where students needed to pass a test in order to get in. This type of student lent itself to what I tend to think of as a traditional style of mathematics education.
We were very textbook driven, and we could pretty much just sort of explain something for 5 minutes and then give the students a textbook and they'd work for a good 40 minutes absolutely fine, sort of independently.
After about 5 years at this first school, Jo moved on.
So I guess the first sort of 5 years of my career, everything was kind of a bit unexciting and a bit lacking inspiration. And then suddenly things changed for me.
Things changed for a couple of different reasons. One, Jo found that the deliver some things from a textbook and then just let the students work style of teaching wasn't that effective at her new position. And two,
it was around that time that I joined Twitter and started going online and finding out this whole other world of maths education.
Jo may be the most passionate advocate of Twitter I have ever met. And I include myself from back in the fave-star everything is a joke weird Twitter days. One of the big reasons Jo loves Twitter so much is the sense of being a part of a bigger mathematics education community that it brings.
There's huge amounts of maths teachers who, like me, will just kind of, in an evening or a weekend, just go on there to chat to other maths teachers.
From the way she describes it, math education Twitter sounds like a super useful community too.
Oh, has anyone got an activity for this topic? And you kind of get inundated with replies and people sending you links, which is just so much nicer than kind of Googling it, to get those kind of personal recommendations, and you find all these hidden gems all the time.
It's enough to almost make me, someone who definitely isn't a math teacher, want to join in.
I found that it's the enthusiasm and the willingness to share ideas is really quite inspiring.
Of course, it is still Twitter though, so not everything is always copacetic.
There's people who argue and disagree about the best ways to teach, and sometimes it gets heated.
But for Jo, it's worth putting up with this occasional negativity to be a part of this Twitter community. A community which sometimes even manages to escape the internet.
And then the other thing that came along with Twitter is that as soon as I joined it, I started going to events, because you sort of join Twitter and you see these conferences and all these things advertised, and they're often at the weekends. And as soon as I started going to those, then I felt like I was part of a community of actual people and not just people online.
Since she was so positive about the effect Twitter had on her teaching practice, I had to ask Jo if she had any advice for a mathematics teacher who may be listening. This is what she said.
If you join Twitter and you just follow a couple of maths teachers, then Twitter will start suggesting other maths teachers to follow. And you very quickly have a whole load of maths teachers you can follow. And then if you start replying to their stuff, or if you make something yourself and you tweet one of these people and say, hey, I made this thing, have a look at it, then suddenly it won't be long before you find you're really immersed in this community.
Twitter isn't the only online mathematics teaching activity Jo takes part in. She's also the author behind the popular mathematics teaching blog, Resourceaholic. Before going too deep, though, let's hear Jo's explanation of what she means by a resource.
When I say resource, I kind of mean tasks or activities or worksheets or ideas that you can use in the lessons.
Even though she now runs a website devoted to interesting resources from around the web, Jo didn't start off teaching with them.
I used to teach just from the textbook, and then I had a moment where I had a trainee teacher in my school, and I saw her at the photocopier, and she was photocopying a really lovely activity for trigonometry, and it's called Trig Pile Up. It's a worksheet, but it's got a load of triangles piled on top of each other. And you have to use just right-angle trigonometry to work out the length of the hypotenuse at the top or something. But you have to start from the bottom and work your way up, and everything links really nicely. And it's a really lovely, colourful resource, and it's really engaging because it's kind of like a puzzle, but you're just practicing. And that was the moment where I realised there's this whole world of lovely resources out there, but teachers don't know where to find them, or teachers spend ages looking for them.
This not knowing where to find these resources became one of the driving ideas behind Jo's blog.
I just give teachers quick, easy access to what I think are the sort of nicest resources available for their teaching.
One of the main ways that Jo accomplishes this goal is through what she calls resource libraries.
For example, there's a page on algebra, and if you go to the algebra resource library, which are in tabs across the top, so they're very easy to find, then I've listed for every topic all my favourite kind of worksheets and activities. So people use that every day to find things for their lessons.
These resources that Jo provides, they go beyond the classroom too.
So for example, I list events that people can go to, or I list trips they might want to take their students on, and I sort of have it's kind of like the information part of my blog.
Jo also writes blog posts about topics like the things she's tried in class or historical mathematics textbooks, but her most popular posts are called 5 Maths Gems, and there have now been 103 of them.
I call them 5 gems, and it's 5 things I've seen on Twitter that I think other maths teachers will like to see. So it might be a puzzle, it might be an activity, it might be just a cool little maths thing that I think teachers don't know about. So I really enjoy writing those posts because I get to do a whole variety of stuff in there, and it's just a quick kind of, here are 5 things you might not have seen.
As for where Jo finds all these resources, beyond Twitter and the one she makes herself, of course, well, I bet you can guess one of the ways. Because
I'm an actual teacher and I'm still planning lessons, that means that when I'm planning my lessons, if I can't find something great for a particular topic, then I will go and look for it online.
The probability that you can guess Jo's other main method likely relies not just on whether or not you are a math teacher, but whether or not you are a UK math teacher. Now, I'm sure those of you who fall within that very specific population are likely shouting "Tez" at the top of your lungs right now. And you'd be right. For those of you who have no idea what Tez is, it's a UK-based company which provides support for teachers. And one of the ways that it provides this support is through their community resources section, where teachers can upload the resources that they use in their lessons. And as is the case with any open community, it can often be hard to figure out which are the very best resources available through Tez. Thankfully, Tez has figured out a way to make sure that the very best things do get noticed.
If you imagine a teacher who's not been teaching too long and they've made something for their own class that they really like and it went really well, and then they think, oh, it might be nice if other teachers use this. And what they'll do is they'll go and load it onto Tez. And then if it weren't for our team of reviewers, then it might be that no one ever sees that because there are tens of thousands of resources on Tez, hundreds of thousands of resources. So that might get lost. But the idea is that our little team of reviewers, we go on and we look at all these new resources that have been added and we find these little gems. And it's just really nice for those new teachers who've never added something before to kind of get some feedback and get a sort of nice review saying this was a really helpful thing to share.
And if Jo really likes one of these resources that she's reviewed, she's of course going to add it to Resourceaholic as well. This community of sharing, though, is a bit of a miracle, as the way that the UK structures their exam grading doesn't exactly incentivize sharing.
In a way, we're all in competition with each other as maths teachers, because the grades that they award in this country at age 16 and at age 18, the sort of the qualifications that they award are pretty much done on a normal curve. So, if the whole country gets better at teaching maths, then it doesn't mean that our students will get better grades because basically the curve just moves up. So, they'll always give the top 3% of the country the top grade. And if we all share our resources and all the schools around us get better, then it means that our own students don't have an advantage. So you could argue that we're all in competition with each other, which means we shouldn't collaborate. But that's sort of a really sort of unpleasant way to think about it.
Thankfully, teachers aren't really an unpleasant bunch.
Collaboration makes us a sort of happier community, and it gives us this sort of lovely job satisfaction and this feeling of belonging. So we have to sort of put to one side the fact that we're essentially competing with each other.
Jo lives this very connected and online life as a teacher. But as important as it has been for her, this still isn't the norm for most teachers. Something Jo's new job has really illustrated.
I have an unusual job for a maths teacher. Just for this year, I have a role where I go into schools and support teachers. So I have sort of 2 or 3 schools that I visit regularly, and I go and observe teachers and I help them out. And it's really very apparent from the first day I started doing this that none of them are aware of my blog and don't use it to find resources. That many of them will kind of discover something. So they'll say to me, oh, I'm using a resource they might say from Pixie Maths or MathSpot. Now, these are really, in my mind, very well-known resources in this country. And these teachers are saying, oh, I found this website. And I think, how can they have just found it? I've known about it for 5 years. I've used it all the time. And it does make you realise that there's a huge amount of maths teachers in this country just don't know about these things that can really save them time.
Well, being online and connected has given Jo this great community to be a part of and led to her current position and definitely transformed the way that she teaches. There's still a price that she has to pay.
Absolutely. It's overwhelming, and I kind of it does make me feel. I don't know, it makes me anxious at times. I feel like it becomes something where it feels like such an important part of my life. Whereas if I actually step back, it's like, well, I could give that up and everything would be okay.
And this is something which only comes into starker relief for Jo when she thinks of it in the context of her children.
I hope that what I'm doing with them is I'm showing them that I can be their mum and I can have a career that's important to me and that I'm passionate about. And I hope I'm kind of being a kind of inspirational career woman to them. And that's kind of something that I think about a lot.
Having now spoken with Jo and heard her passion for mathematics education, I don't think that she has anything to worry about. Her children will hear exactly that. I do want to close on a slightly different note, though. Specifically, with the story of a side effect of Jo being so active in the online mathematics education world that she definitely did not see coming. Specifically, being invited to participate in the A-Periodical's big internet maths off, where she did better than I did and made it to the second round.
I struggle to call myself a mathematician, even though I spend my days doing maths, but it's very much school level maths. So for me to be invited to take part in that was really, really nice for me, because it made me sort of feel like, you know, I'm a part of the maths teacher community, but to sort of be kind of joining a kind of mathematician community, which I see as sort of joined but slightly separate, that was really exciting.
Jo, I want to thank you so much for giving me your time today and talking to me about mathematics education, a topic I spend way too little time thinking about.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I always enjoy talking about maths education, so anytime.
And that is all the time we have for this episode of Relatively Prime. I want to thank Jo Morgan for taking time out of her life to speak with me. Make sure that you check her out on Twitter at MathsGem. That is Maths, J-E-M, and at resourceaholic.com. I also want to thank Lowercase N for the music you heard in this episode. You can find more of their music over at lowercasen.bandcamp.com or on the show page for this episode on relprime.com. But most of all, I want to thank all of my patrons on Patreon. Without y'all, this show just wouldn't be around. So thank you so much, because I love making this, and without you, I couldn't. So you are all the best. If you want to join them in supporting the show, head on over to patreon.com/relprime or relprime.com/support. And if you support the show at the bonus feed or above level, you will get access to my uncut conversation with Jo, where there's a lot that I was not able to fit into this episode. Finally, Relatively Prime is created under Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. So please feel free to recut it, remix it, reuse it however you want. Just make sure that you got the original audio from Relatively Prime. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, I hope that all of your weeks are matherific.